training and learning advisor for our FACS UNDP team. And I work mostly on effective collaborative action. So I would like to welcome you all to this session on facilitating trust for collaboration. And this session today, we've got two amazing partners joining from Reos, Adam Kahane and Tejaswini. We are going to introduce them soon. First, I want to share a little bit about the context of this session. So Fede, please, if you can go to the first slide. Excellent, thank you. So in this 2-hour interactive masterclass, we will have the opportunity to learn and explore how to facilitate and build trust within multi-stakeholder collaborative efforts. And the objectives that we are going to cover is how do we increase awareness of the role of trust in collaborating to have a positive effect on change in the complex systems that we work on a daily basis. How do we understand and situate the importance of trust for collaboration in food systems? And how do we learn practices and tools that can foster and nurture trust within the groups that we work with or facilitate? And before passing the mic to our outstanding facilitators today, I just wanted to share a bit of context as to why we are offering this masterclass. And this year, as part of our efforts to build capacity on deep collaboration, at FACS, Food Agriculture Commodity Systems, we have launched the Guide to Effective Collaborative Action. And this guide was built upon 10 years of experience supporting multi-stakeholder collaboration and systems change within national commodity platforms globally. And we talk about effective collaborative action as a type of action that goes beyond a theoretical exercise or a conceptual ideation, and it focuses on the need to bring about systems change into food and agriculture commodity systems in a much more effective way. And we need to do so together. And of course, we know that action is needed urgently. If we go to the next slide, some of you are already probably familiar with effective collaborative actions components. So we have 4 building blocks. We've got 3 key elements, apart from the building blocks, stakeholder actions and backbone support, and the 4 essential practices. And all of these elements were introduced through the ECA discovery sessions. If you haven't managed to join one of these sessions yet, please stay tuned and sign up to the next session to learn more about this methodology. And trust is a foundational quality to build collaborative efforts, particularly within complex projects with multiple stakeholders, like the ones that we work on. That needs to be on.
You're muted, so yeah, you're back.
Sorry, thank you, Nicola. We feel that trust is something that needs to be worked on as early as possible in the process. So, and it needs to be sustained through time across stages, efforts, and practices. This is why we're placing so much focus. And Fede, please, if we can go to the next slide. We've introduced the topic of trust as the first of many themes that will be introduced as part of a broader effort we are undertaking to build capacity on deep collaboration globally. So for June and July, we're focusing on the theme of facilitating trust for collaboration. And now I'm going to hand over to the experts. We are incredibly honored and privileged to bring to you these outstanding facilitators today. Adam Kahane is the director of Reos Partners. He's a leading organizer, designer, and facilitator of processes through which business, government, and civil society leaders can work together to address challenges. He's also the author of Solving Tough Problems, an open way of talking, listening, and creating new realities, about which Nelson Mandela said, this breakthrough book addresses the central challenge of our time, finding a way to work together to solve the problems we have created. He's also the author of Power and Love, a theory and practice of social change, transformative scenario planning, working together to change the future, and Collaborating with the Enemy, how to work with people you don't agree with or like or trust. And finally, Facilitating Breakthrough, how to remove obstacles, bridge differences, and move forward together. All of these books, which I highly recommend to keep very close in our bookshelves, considering the work that we do. Tejaswini Junjunwala is a consultant at Reos Partners, where she helps groups to leverage the collective intelligence in their systems in order to build resilience and converge effectively in decision-making processes. Her experience in group process development and project management allows her to empathize with different perspectives and create safe spaces for multiple stories to coexist. She has worked on social and organizational change issues in private sector organizations, nonprofits, activist movements, and academia. So without further ado, over to you, Adam and Tejaswini. Thank you very much for joining everyone.
Thank you so much, Soleil. I think I can speak for Adam and myself, both of us, that we're both very excited to be here. We had a great session last week, and we're looking forward to this one as well. So thank you all for everyone who showed up today. And I know I can see based on where you are that for some of you the timing is pretty odd, but hopefully you'll get something useful out of these 2 hours. So before we get right in, just two things. We're hoping for this session to be rather interactive. If you can and your internet allows, please keep your cameras on. That's the first. And the second is that we'd really like to get a sense of where this group's at. And so I'm going to share a question with you. And if you can answer in the chat, that would be great. The question is, what is a question you are coming in with or a challenge you are living with on facilitating trust for collaboration? So I'm going to share this again in the chat for those of you who are a bit more visual. And we'll just wait a couple of minutes until we see some responses trickle in. This will give us a better idea of where this group is at, and it'll give a chance to you to see where your colleagues are at as well, and what they're coming in with.
Thank you very much, Tej. And also to say and to remind everyone, you can check the chat, and I'll put it again, but there's interpretation feature available to Spanish. So I'll copy the instructions again for you to access if you want to use this functionality. Thank you.
And in case you can just see Adam or just me, you can click on the top right corner and click on gallery view again. We are not on Spotlight anymore, so you can see the rest of your colleagues as well. So I'm seeing something about maintaining trust. How do you start talking about trust with others? What do you do when you believe people aren't being honest or coming in with integrity? What are indicators of trust that have been successfully materialized? Interesting. How do you measure trust? How to help people go beyond their prejudice about others? Yeah, how do you bridge that trust gap, if there is one, between local communities and the private sector? Good question. Yeah. History of exploitation and trust and uneven power. Yes. How do you define trust? So I think we'll let these continue to trickle in, and I will pass it on to Adam. But you're welcome to continue seeing what's showing up, and then hopefully we'll get into some rich discussions today. Over to you, Adam.
Okay, thank you, Tej. Hello, everyone. I'm going to make a brief presentation of some examples and some concepts. So let me share my screen here. My colleagues and I have been working as facilitators of multi-stakeholder collaboration for the past 30 years in many different contexts. And what we're hoping is sharing our particular experience and perspective will enable you to have some other ways of looking at this work. When I looked at this title, Facilitating Trust for Collaboration in Food and Agricultural Commodities Systems, I realized that the title summarizes well or provides a good summary of the points we wanted to make, going from the end of the sentence backwards. Our perspective is that systems change, or particularly affecting systems change in complex systems, requires collaboration, that the lack of trust is the primary obstacle to collaboration, and that getting more and better collaboration requires more and better facilitation. So that's a bit the overall perspective. And the outline of what I want to present in the next 20 minutes is 3 examples. We are practitioners. We spend all day, every day, designing and facilitating and organizing multi-stakeholder collaborations. And from that practice have derived some theories. And so I will go through 3 of those. Okay. The first example I wanted to show was from Mexico. Those of you from Latin America may remember the massacre at Ayotzinapa in 2014, where 42 indigenous student teachers were killed. And around the same time in Mexico, there was a scandal about the corruption in the building of the house of the wife of the president. And as a result, there were hundreds of thousands of people marching in the streets all over Mexico, calling for systems change. And a project was started called Mexico's Posibles, Possible Mexicos, to deal with a complex, problematic situation that had the summary illegality, insecurity, inequity. And it's an interesting example to share, I think, because first of all, the work has been going on now for 7 years. And so there's some understanding of what works over time. And secondly, it has involved several hundred people from an exceptionally broad group of Mexican stakeholders, including people who have a long history of conflict and oppression and mistrust. And what I want to do for just 3 minutes is to show you some photographs of this group working together as it changed over time, because I think this is a way of explaining or illustrating some of the key principles in how Reos approaches this kind of work. This is a photograph of the first moment of the first session of the first workshop. And you don't know these people, but maybe you can see from the photograph that they're not very comfortable sitting in a circle together. I just would add in parentheses that in our view, a lot of facilitation has to do with spaces and organizing spaces in different ways to enable people to collaborate. So this is the first moment. And almost immediately thereafter, we got into the question, the most fundamental question of all, what's going on here, using a methodology that some of you may have used, Lego Serious Play. This is a photograph of a transgender government official presenting her understanding of the Mexican reality. The man sitting next to her is the CEO of a big Mexican company. And when I look at this photograph, I can see, first of all, that he's trying to understand why does she see things the way she sees them, and that this is unfamiliar to him. These workshops involved many different activities or spaces. This is a walk outside, in this case with a Catholic bishop and a feminist leader. I've always found it very interesting that when we do evaluations of our workshops, people say, yes, the workshop sessions were okay, but what they really liked was the walks. That was really productive. And I started to wonder, why is it that people so uniformly rate the simplest possible activity? Look around the room, find somebody different from you, go for a walk with them for half an hour. Why do they rate this so highly? At first, I thought it was the mechanics of the walk, where you're traveling through space together without your phone or papers. But one of our Mexican colleagues pointed out to me that there's something more fundamental going on here, which is that when you're walking with somebody, first you're accepted as a fellow human being. And as a result of that, you may choose to change your thinking or your acting, but the sequence is very important. You can see in the sequence of photographs, the relationship between people changes over time. They're building something together. There's a reason why building something on the wall together is different from everybody writing in their own notebook or typing in their own computer. This is a theologian and a peasant leader or a campesino leader working out the details of their conclusions. This is a revolutionary leader greeting a policeman and saying, the last time I was in a room with the policeman, I was being tortured. So something here about historical lack of trust, building of trust over time. And here you see this photograph of the several workshops later, the same people in a circle, and maybe you can see the relationship between them has changed. So this is the first example where I wanted to emphasize the importance of spaces, and this group now presenting their work publicly. As a result of this set of activities, this group has worked on many different initiatives. Those of you who know the Mexican context know that it is not heaven on earth, but this is one group that is able to work together in spite of a context of increasing polarization, and to work to make a difference across their differences. The second example I wanted to give you is a project, again, that's been going on for over 10 years in your field, Sustainable Food Lab. Here, the members of the group are global leaders of food companies and food NGOs and research institutions. It's called the Sustainable Food Laboratory. And here again, over time, many different projects, some of which failed, some of which succeeded. I've always enjoyed working with people in food systems because they understand the rhythm of, or the basics of trying to make things grow. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And the things that don't work, you compost and you try again. So the lesson of this second example is learning to work together through working together, not through negotiating, possibly working together. And the third example I wanted to give is from the country that Tej and I live in, Canada. I don't want to suggest that this is only work for other countries. This is a very difficult situation in Canada of the health situation of First Nations, Indigenous people, and this is a difficult area to work in. And I had the experience as a facilitator of coming in, as I usually do, giving a presentation like the one I'm giving now, trying to impress everybody with my experience and expertise, and having, in this case, one of the leaders of the group, a man named George Moosewagen, say out loud, "I don't trust you." So this question of trust doesn't only involve relationships among stakeholders, but also relationships between stakeholders and facilitators. And in this is a very good example of this was not primarily a personal issue between me and George, but the fact that we're both embedded in a larger system, and in particular a system where white people come all the time and suggest they know what Indigenous people should do. And the point of this third example is it started off with a lack of trust, and over the course of the hours and days that followed, we built some trust and were able to work together. So these are the three examples I wanted to give you. Reos's work is facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration, not only in food systems, although sometimes in food systems, but our specialty is not in a particular subject, but in this way of working together internationally. And although our primary, or my and Tej's primary activity is designing, facilitating, and organizing such processes, we also spend time writing books about it and trying to derive theory from practice, not the other way around. So let me offer you three theories. One of the pioneers of this field, at least in the United States, a man who worked in the 1940s and 50s, you may have heard his name, Kurt Lewin, said, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. So here are three theories that can get us going in the conversation. The first is to understand that a collaboration is not the only option. And it needs to be understood against the backdrop of other ways of dealing with problematic situations. So if we're in a situation that is not the way we want it to be, one option, I think for many people, the default option is to try to force it to be the way we want it to be. This has obvious downsides. We try to force it the way we want it to be, and other people push back. The second option for dealing with situations that are not the way we want them to be, if we can't make them be the way they want them to be, is to try to adapt. Again, not at all an unusual option. Probably most of the time, most of the day, we adapt to situations we can't change. A third option is to exit. Situations not the way we want it to be. We can't force it to be the way we want it to be. We are not willing to live with it as it is, and so we exit. We quit our job, we get a divorce, we emigrate. Again, not an unusual option. And collaborating, in our way of thinking about it, needs to be understood as one of four options. For some people, it's their favorite option. For other people, it's their least favorite option, but it's a choice. It's literally impossible to collaborate with everybody on everything. So the question is, with whom do we want to collaborate on what, when? And I think that's important backdrop to think about collaboration. Now, when you do a Google search for the word collaborating, you get this kind of image, this peaceful, productive, mansplaining activity, which looks very calm and productive. But you also get this image. In English and Spanish and other languages, the word collaborating also has the connotation of betrayal. So this is an image of two women in Brittany after the Second World War who were accused of being collaborators with the Nazis, and their head was shorn and they were paraded through the streets barefoot. So the reason I emphasize these two meanings is this is the intrinsic challenge of collaboration, that on the one hand, we think that in order to move forward, we need to work with others. And at the same time, there is always the risk of betraying or being seen to betray our side. And this is why collaboration is intrinsically difficult. I think maybe the most important thing to say about collaboration is it's not as straightforward as people expect it to be, and therefore they're surprised and upset. This is an image of collaboration, a group of people trying to get somewhere, a complicated trip. They're going to figure out how they're going to get there. And this is the recipe. Number one, focus on the good of the whole. Number two, focus on agreeing the problem, solution, and the plan. And number three, focus on what people need to do. So I'd like to have the poll, please. The question is, how would you rate this as a recipe for collaborating to address complex challenges? Can you please give your answer? Another 15 of you, please. Okay, can we hear from the last few people? Okay, if you could show the results, please. Okay, so 57% of you said this is usually a good recipe. 43% said this is usually not a good recipe. This is a trick question. It is in general not a good recipe, and specifically in contexts that are out of control, that cannot be controlled, where we don't have control over the situation or what will work or doesn't work, and particularly where we don't have control over the other actors. And the second theory I want to offer is this image of stretch collaboration. Thank you. Which has this characteristic that rather than focusing on the good and the harmony of the team, We need to embrace conflict and connection, and that includes power differences. In how we advance the work, rather than agreeing on the problem and the solution, making one optimum plan, we need to experiment our way forward. And in how we participate in the situation, rather than trying to figure out, focusing on what other people want to do, to recognize how we are part of the situation and ultimately can only control what we ourselves do. So the essence of the difference between conventional collaboration and stretched collaboration is viewing collaboration as a unitary activity, one superior whole, one optimum plan, one paramount leader, to understanding collaboration as an activity involving multiplicity, multiple diverse wholes, multiple emergent possibilities, and especially multiple creators. And the final theory I would like to offer is something that we've been thinking about for a long time, and it was inspired by a sentence that Martin Luther King Jr. said in one of his final speeches before he was assassinated. He said, power, and this relates to power, something which has come up in the chat. He said, power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. And one of the great problems of history is the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites. What we need to realize is that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. It is precisely this collision of immoral power with powerless morality which constitutes the major crisis of our time. And in trying to understand the significance of that for our work, we looked at the definitions of power, love, justice that King has used from his teacher, Paul Tillich. And this is the final slide that I want to show, that in our understanding, the essence of what is required to facilitate collaboration in complex systems, the essence of stretched collaboration or transformative facilitation, if you want to boil it down to the crucial things or dynamics that the facilitator has to pay attention to, there are three. To pay attention to removing the obstacles to power, which Tillich defines as the drive to self-realization, removing the obstacles to love, which Tillich defines as the drive to reunification, and removing the obstacles to justice, which has to do with enabling the expression of power and love by all participants. So I've deliberately given you a rich set of concepts for us to talk about together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. So what I had been monitoring the chat throughout, and some of the questions are really quite excellent. So we're just going to do, the way we'll spend the remaining part of our time is we'll do a little bit of question and answer, then put you in small groups so you can reflect with some other people on what was just presented, the discussion that was just had, and then we'll do another round and we'll go from there. So I think maybe if you want to look at the questions, or if you've already been looking at them, maybe use the hand raising function to either bring forward a question that you have that you're still sitting with after sharing it, or in the chat, or maybe highlight somebody else's question that you really think is pertinent to this moment and what's on your mind. And we'll be here for, I think, about 10, 12 minutes before we put you in breakout rooms. So Charlotte just added
I see that. Yeah. So thank you, Charlotte. I like this question because for me, this is the most practical question for facilitators. And I've been thinking that it's possible to go through our agendas, our workshop agendas or our process agendas, and literally code everything. Is this something to unblock power? Is this something to unblock love? Is this something to unblock justice? And I believe that 90% of what we're doing can be understood as one or several of those actions. So let me just give you some examples. Unblocking power means giving everyone the opportunity to say and work on what matters to them. So an example in facilitation is open space technology, because in open space, the essential characteristic is that people work on what they care about, not what the team leader or what the facilitator think they ought to care about. So that's an example. An example of actions that unblock justice are actions that enable everybody to participate equitably, and which allows the group to see in which the dynamics, including the power dynamics in the larger system, are being revealed within the group itself. Yes, Julia, it is a tall order. The good news is it's only three things. The bad news is they're challenging things, but the reason we're offering this particular theory is that it focuses our attention on what we understand to be the three most fundamental dynamics in facilitating breakthrough.
Adam, Tej, I've been looking at the questions on the chat, and I'm wondering, based on your experience, there are some questions around how do you start facilitating trust, particularly when you have stakeholders that might not be interested or might come with a history of exploitation and lack of trust. So I'm wondering, since you've been there, you've actually been there in front of a group for the first time, having these, what are the words that you use? What are the things that you do, very, very practically speaking, that you can share with us? Even, making us picture you there in front of the group.
Yeah.
Well, let me answer that and Andrew's point that even if there is equity or justice within a space, there is uneven power and ultimate decision making. So the starting point in our thinking is that people always have a choice about whether to collaborate, in other words, to try to effect change multilaterally, or to use one of the three unilateral options, forcing, adapting, and exiting. So people are always making that assessment. It's not even a stable assessment. So they may believe, based on their experience, that they'd be better off trying to force, adapt, or exit. And so participating in a collaborative process means, in essence, I'm willing to see whether this might work. And I'll form an assessment, and I may leave after an hour or after the meeting. The second thing I want to say, answering Andrew's point, is yes. What we're trying to do in collaboration is not simply change the dynamic amongst a small group, but for that group in turn to change the dynamics in the larger system. And the reason for collaborating is we think we have a better chance of changing the dynamics in the larger system if we work on it together. The México es Posibles group has used an interesting expression to describe their work. They've said we're ejemplo vivo, a living example, that we see that this can be done, and therefore we are working together to try to do it in the larger system against, I would say, a very difficult forces of forcing and inequity and injustice in the larger system. But that's the reason for the collaboration. And finally, Maria, to answer your question, I'm not sure there's anything you can do or say at the beginning. That's why I found the interaction with George Muswagen in Manitoba, my home country, so startling, and this is why I chose it as the final story in the book Facilitating Breakthrough. I think with respect to the group and with respect to the facilitator, people are watching and waiting to form their own view. There's nothing I can say or do. And I often have the thought about my own facilitation that people are just going to decide. And in the case of George, when I asked him a few days later, why are you still here? Why did you agree to continue with the process? He said, well, I was watching you. I was watching you very carefully. And I decided that I believe that you're trying to do what you say you're trying to do, which is help us rather than boss us around. And therefore, I decided to trust you. He said about First Nations in Canada, our history teaches us we can't dole out trust like candy. So that's why I wanted to emphasize that trust is not a precondition. Usually in complex and conflictual contexts, we start with mistrust, but we can build it through being together and working together. And the final thing I'll say is it's not that either we trust or we don't trust. The black and white is not a helpful way to look at it. Maria, I trust that we will do this seminar together and that you will do what you said you would do to organize it, but that doesn't mean I trust you about everything. I have trust about certain matters and not knowing about other matters. So I think in a lot of this, the mistake is to think of it as black and white. Either there's trust or no trust. Either there's agreement or no agreement. Either we're going to do everything together or nothing together. And the collaboration is always in the messy middle, where we're trying to build over time our capacity to work together. Sorry, Tej, I think I've gone on too long.
No, that's good. Those are all really good points. Maybe I'll just add a couple more from my experience. One of the questions early on was, what is trust? And I think the best definition I've seen in recent times is trust is that I will give you the benefit of doubt for you to do your best job. So I think that's the one that resonated most with me. Having said that, sorry, my computer's just out of charge. 1 second. Having said that, I want to say that I think trust is definitely not a precondition. I would also say that trust is possibly the outcome, and building the conditions necessary for trust to be there or trust to get built is what us as facilitators can do. And that's what Adam's presentation, from my perspective, was mostly about. And then getting really into the practicals, because I see 2 or 3 questions around that. What does it look like in person? What does it look like online? There are a couple of things. I think there are lots of things that Reos does as facilitators, as an organization, that we've got these practices that are tried and tested, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and are more powerful. Even though they're very simple, they're quite powerful. And one of them is the paired walk, which is what Adam described. We'll often curate our spaces and ask the organizations we're working with to make sure that we've got access to nature, that the rooms are well lit, that people can go out for walks together. So when possible and when the resources allow, when you're facilitating in person, to always oscillate between the larger group, where sometimes just a few voices or powerful voices can take over the space for long periods of time, and then oscillating between bigger group and smaller group constantly. That breaks down some of the power dynamics, doesn't make it go away, but allows for a bit more breathing room for other voices to surface, for trust to get built, for collaboration to occur, possibly trust to get built. The idea of sitting in a circle, which is, someone described, a colleague describes, one of the oldest technologies that we know, sitting around a fire. So the way you organize and curate an actual space and how CAF people sit around makes a huge difference. Giving voice to everyone in the beginning of a meeting by making sure that you're giving everyone an equal amount of time to just be able to share where they're coming in from. It drops a huge amount of anxiety in a room. I notice it all the time. Every time I'm in a room, allowing people to just share where they're coming from, the beginning of a meeting creates the conditions for more or better collaboration to occur. I think online, I think there are lots of things online, but the two things I'll say is, an example of what just happened earlier today is I asked you all to switch your camera on, if possible. And on the one hand, and I realize that many of you are in different countries and internet, so on and so forth. So I can invite you to switch your camera on, I can ask you to switch it on. But if you choose not to, for very good reasons, as a facilitator, I can help build a trusting environment by trusting that you are listening. So the point that I'm trying to make is that trust begets trust. So the more we as facilitators and as participants start trusting, more trust gets built. And then the other thing around online that I'll say is paying attention. I think Adam has spoken to this, but constantly paying attention to the group. And if someone's going off mute, if cameras are on, what their body language is like. It's a little bit harder to do when you're trying to look at this sort of like jigsaw puzzle with pictures moving around. But as a facilitator, I'm constantly looking and trying to read the room, whether virtually or online. And then also being cognizant of how much airtime one participant is getting versus the other. So maybe just a couple of reactions or other questions if people want to put their hand up or just add it to the chat.
Charlotte? Charlotte, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sorry, thank you. No, I just wanted to react to what I think Julia just wrote in the chat. Last year I was working on the food systems dialogue support team with 4SD, and so we were doing a lot of these online briefings on facilitating these dialogues. And I think two elements retrospectively we saw as key for, or three, for trust is one, also the effort made in the preparation in terms of being inclusive and really making a lot of effort that all the different voices can be heard. And I think if people see that that effort has been made before, it already helps to solve potential biases. Another thing then was the whole quality of facilitation, all the things that you've just mentioned, and making people feel that everybody can speak out and has an equal voice in that space, but also the building things over time. We were really recommending to hold several dialogues because you have a completely different conversation. And I was struck on another topic. In France, we've just had a very, very long trial of the terrorists who attacked various places in France over months. And some journalists were saying how over these months, people from the victims and the accused, the different parties were starting to build friendships across those lines because of having interacted for so long. And I just thought that was a very powerful example of how like totally extreme positions can come to relate in their humanity when you, and probably because it was in the context of setting justice. And I think there was a trust that the justice system was doing its best. So I just wanted to share those insights. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlotte. Great insights. Others? I think let's use this moment to actually do some breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation. How about that? So just in a moment, Frederica will put you in groups of between 2 and 4, depending on whether we're odd or even number. And then I'm inviting you to reflect on experiences you've had where you believe facilitating collaboration and trust is pivotal to the work. So what are the deeper challenges and obstacles that come to mind? And these experiences just could be either in recent times or in the past, and they could have been a success or a failure, or apparently a success or failure. So sharing the question again, reflect on the experiences you've had where you believe facilitating collaboration and trust is pivotal to the work. What are deeper challenges and obstacles that come to mind? And so you've got about 10 minutes in your groups to reflect on this question and your experiences, and we'll come back in plenary after that.
Yes, here we go.
That's all of you. So hopefully you had some interesting discussions with your colleagues and acquaintances or people you've never met before. What we want to do now is just hear from what highlights from your conversations, and then we'll get into a little bit more dialogue and possibly questions if you have. So I'd like, if someone wants to volunteer, and then I'd go around my screen just for a highlight, and you can share. I think we'll just in the spirit of democracy of time, maybe about a minute each, since we're about 20 something, 20 of us that will be sharing, 21, about a minute each, a highlight, or even perhaps a way that you have found through your experience of how to address the challenge of building trust and collaboration. So if we can have one volunteer, and then I'll go around my screen.
I'll volunteer really quick because I have to go. This is Marlon Flores. I was working with Vanessa, and I have 1 minute. So the point was about I felt when I heard the presentations that we didn't establish a point or a scenario where collaboration doesn't happen. So what are the problems? What are the reasons that collaborations don't happen, where collaboration breaks down? So that would be an interesting point to start a discussion with, to look at the causes, at the root causes of broken collaboration. And then we thought about, discuss about, about transparency. And it's something which is very important to build collaboration. Because when you know somebody is being transparent, and you know this company or this person or this representative, there is transparency on that side, then you're more inclined to open about it. So transparency and credibility. So in the facts, UNDP facts initiative, we work with companies like large commodity buyers. And they might or they might not be transparent at all times because of their private companies, because they are businesses. They have their proprietary rights on certain policies, procedures, business plans, net revenues, etc. So they cannot be 100% transparent when they come into a conversation, depending who they're talking to. There are different approaches to transparency when you deal with these companies. And they all try to be very transparent, but when you're negotiating with like indigenous peoples or groups that are by nature, they don't trust you, then it's very difficult to establish this collaboration. So I think the discussion needs to elaborate a little more on what are the reasons that prevent collaboration from happening and how to tackle those issues, and also deal with the elements of transparency and credibility. That will be all. Maybe Vanessa wants to add something. We talk about the political aspects, facilitators, which actually mediate in conflicts and manage to get agreements, like a policy or political issues, government versus indigenous peoples is also it's a very good example. Or in the US, you can look at how difficult it is to get bipartisan agreements in Congress. So, and that type of collaboration needs to be analyzed to see why it doesn't happen and what are the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, that was great. And what we're going to do is we're just tracking some of the main questions that are showing up, and then we'll bring them back for either the rest of you to answer or for us to address. I just want to say that actually interpretation is happening both ways, in Spanish and English. So if you would like to speak up in Spanish and ask a question in Spanish, please feel free to, or even share your reflection when I call you out. Can we hear from Carmen next, if you are able to go off mute and share a little bit? Since maybe Carmen needs a moment, if we can hear from Leon, and then we'll go with Gyro after, but I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right.
All right. Well, hi everyone. Leon here. Well, I didn't manage to get around to my sharing because I am a bit of a slow reflector, I must say. However, I was with Muhammad Yayat, and he shared his sort of work. So two case examples. One was related to a fishing issue where he had to sort of facilitate conversation or sort of works between two different government ministries who have sort of clashing goals and objectives. So it's a bit tricky. He found himself in a very frustrating situation because there was, sort of no clear path forward. In all summary, he did mention that at the end of the day, they still managed to break through. They still arrive towards a solution. Obviously, it takes a length of time to have that conversation ongoing and find that middle grounds of agreement between both parties. And I think overall, both ministries, the Ministry of Environment and the Marine Fisheries, they want to do good for the people, for local fishing communities, but they still have their objectives which are clashing each other. But with that little sort of mutual agreement that the heart and soul is the fishermen and the fishing community, and while they want to increase revenue, they want to protect the environment as well. They eventually found a middle ground agreement. Another case is on palm oil expansion, as we all know, for Indonesia. A particular ministry wants to expand more land, etc. The forestry wants to, protect its forest, and eventually, obviously, over years of conversation, reach an agreement to say, all right, stop issuing licenses for expansion, but let's optimize what we have. Let's make the maximum use of our land. So yeah, that's an example that we have. No discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leon. Can we hear from Gyro, and then we'll go with Andrea. Gyro, am I pronouncing your name right? I think it might be higher. Either way, Andrea. So we'll give Gyro. Gyro. Right. We'll give him a moment.
Hola, ¿me escuchan? Hola,
Yes,
¿me escuchan?
Carmen.
Habla Carmen Rosa.
Sí, Carmen, te escuchamos.
Me tocó con Jairo, pero en realidad no llegamos a interactuar. Yo tengo problemas con el audio, me he conectado con un audífono rápido, pero lo que yo tengo que, por ejemplo, compartir con ustedes es de que nosotros hemos generado unas plataformas de interacción, de diálogo, multiactor, multisectorial y multinivel, y desde ese punto de vista es que venimos realizando el abordaje de estos temas, en donde tratamos de compartir objetivos comunes, realizamos desde las funciones y competencias cada uno cómo trabajar con una visión compartida, y en algunos casos de manera muy puntual hemos establecido acuerdos sectoriales, y en esos acuerdos sectoriales abordamos por cadena y tenemos de manera muy puntual cómo abordar, por ejemplo, en el caso de cultivos tropicales, como es el caso de cacao, acuerdos acuerdo de cacao diversidad enfocando esta temática. Y desde ese punto de vista es de que abordamos la temática de manera compartida, pública, privada, la sociedad civil y la cooperación internacional, y alineamos las intervenciones. Es un proceso, sí, porque a veces cambian permanentemente personas, pero en ese proceso es que estamos trabajando.
Thank you so much, Carmen. So I'm going to go next with Andrea, and then we'll go with Greta. And just to say, perhaps I think what would be useful for all of us in this group is if you can, from your conversation, focus on the challenges and questions you might be wrestling with that are still sitting with you. So Andrea, and then Greta.
Hi, thanks. I was talking with Julia. We're reflecting on our work on facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration processes in agriculture and fisheries. And yeah, we discussed some of the deeper challenges that we could think of in terms of facilitating collaboration and trust. And we found like we were, brainstorming a bit on the obstacles, things that come in the way. And one thing is competition that we could think of is competition for resources, the unwillingness of sharing information for different reasons. And so like a sort of, which results in like a lack of transparency over interests and so on and so forth. And also we discussed about inequality and uneven distribution of power. And like more like in terms of, we were debating on like what are the incentives for collaboration versus like incentives for competition. And we were also like discussing about, Julia was sharing some examples of like, also like in academic institutions sometimes, where you are incentivized to result in the first 1% and compete against your other fellow students, and how that incentivizes behaviors of like not sharing information, not sharing perhaps books or like resources that could help other fellow students get like good grades, because you need to result in like the first 1%, and that's parallel of like some, perhaps in some instances where we work. But then we also went through like some more operational challenges. For example, managing from our side, for like the facilitator side, to engage representatives of stakeholders that have the decision-making power. So sometimes we have instances where organizations just send like a person that is only there for like listening, making sure that like the information is sent back to then the organization, but it's not there with complete information about internal processes and dynamics within the organization. So that limits collaboration, limits opportunities. And also we discussed about the issues with turnover that sometimes you have in multi-stakeholder collaboration processes. So as you were saying before, these processes of creating trust really need time and deep collaboration. So if you don't manage to engage the same representatives over time, every time you have to start from scratch. So really important we find to have continuous engagement by the same people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I don't know
Thanks,
if Julia wants to add something. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go with Greta first, and then we'll come back to Julia. Just to remind everyone, I want to hear from everyone. So maybe if you can stay to your minute, and then we'll get into a dialogue hopefully after. So Greta, over to you. And then we'll go with Julia. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I was speaking with Yasmin, and we also, for us, one important challenge is the turnover, as Andrea mentioned, especially at the governmental level, and also the competing agendas. It was another challenge that we identified, as well as, for example, the difficulty to engage in the same space different stakeholders. So for example, governmental representatives with farmer representatives is sometimes difficult because farmers can feel not at ease to speak freely. And then, another last point that we mentioned was the fact that now more and more we do things virtually, while, as we said before, it's important to also meet the participants, take a walk, go for a coffee in order to build the trust. And also another last point, sorry, is the importance also to know the context and especially the political, economic, and social aspects of a country where we work in, and where we have multi-stakeholder dialogues. So these are a bit the things that we discussed. I don't know if Yasmin has to wants to add anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go with Julia, and then we go with Yasmin.
I think Andrea summarized it very well. I'll just throw in a few more that came up now while listening to colleagues. I think vested interests, hidden agendas, so knowing the real motivations of people that you're in a group with will keep people from not sharing, not trusting. Power asymmetries was just mentioned. And then I think Adam mentioned before in the Canadian experience, previous experience of abuse or exploitation, which you expect to happen again potentially. So that's also, I guess, obstacles to trust. I'd be really keen to get into how to address those, actually. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let's go with Yasmin and then Simon.
Hi, so I don't have much to add because Greta covered it very well, and we had lots of synergies with the points that Andrea mentioned as well. I suppose something to add is as we were considering, how can you ensure the appropriate context, geographical, cultural context, is the need to consider who you're convening in the room, what they're representing, whether they have the right to represent that organization or that nation, and then also how they're then put in a space and what opportunities they're given. And I think this links very much back to the space points. We talked about the challenges of this in a virtual environment, but also considered how much progress has been made, for example, since the beginning of the pandemic in creating safer spaces for dialogue and collaboration. So I won't add anything else beyond that.
Thank you. Go with Simon and then Nicola.
Thanks, Teja. Yeah, we had a conversation with Gede and Lavinia, and one thing we talked about actually was linked into the unblocking power, love and justice point. Of course, there is going to be power around that circle, and in each group of stakeholders, there'll be somebody with more power than the others. And so we talked about how you get that person to come forward first and demonstrate trust in the others, because it's very likely then that their group will follow on with them. So it's not a case of everybody having to trust everybody at the same time. It's the people who got the most power taking that step first was a thought that we were playing with in the course of our discussion. And then the other thing was the use of trust from the facilitator to the participants. So you talked a little bit about trust being a multiplier, you know, that it tends to go downhill like a snowball and keep getting bigger and bigger. You can contribute to that yourself as the facilitator by trusting the participants to do things like turning up on time or coming back from a break on time or whatever it might be. And those little bits will add to the size of the snowball was the other thought. That's it from us.
Thank you. Nicola, and then go with Yelena.
Yeah, I think a lot of things that people have said resonated with me with my own experience. I mean, to me, the key obstacles is actually finding the right facilitator, you know, the person who understands the local context, who can unblock, you know, love, power, and justice, who can, you know, use whatever techniques we use to have people collaborate together. And this is really an issue for you in terms of procurement process, people not understanding the value of facilitation. So seeing that as a role that is like on the side of the project rather than really central in bringing people together. So, you know, we never have enough budgets, we never have enough time, we're not tapping into the networks of local facilitation that exist in all countries. So really, I think that's the because if you have the right facilitator, a lot of things are resolved in terms of obstacles, you know, so that's a key obstacle we're facing. I think the other key obstacle I see in some of the process we have is this push for the optimum plan and shared vision, you know, like Ada mentioned in terms of conventional collaboration. I see a lot of pushing for, we need to agree together on what is this shared vision or shared commitment, and that delay a lot the process of getting to the action. And so, and not creating the space for divergence. I really see that as a key obstacle, that we don't embrace conflict, we don't embrace the elephant in the room, and we are scared of it because of we don't have the right facilitator, etc. So not creating those spaces for divergence. And yeah, I'll stop here. Those are two big things on my side.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Nicola. Yelena, and then Lavinia.
Hi. I spoke with Annalisa, and we focused on two topics. One of them was the trust between small farmers and local government officials, as we both work with small grants, and I am also I was a government public servant, and the other one was government behavior, regardless of what UNDP or a specific consultant tells them that is the best for the situation. So for the first, I mentioned a very specific situation that happens here on this territory. We were a part of Yugoslavia, and we have a socialistic background. So in the beginning, when I started to work with small grants, farmers didn't want to take grants because they were afraid that something will be taken from them due to the fact that they took the money. So we had to overcome that obstacle and create trust with farmers. So I was in the field all the time. I became not a public servant, but farmers' friends to enable that process and to continue it with EU grants, because there was a huge lack of trust in that situation. The second one, government behavior. Lisa mentioned how in the case of Madagascar, regardless of UNDP consultation to how to maintain the laws on usage of the land, they are changed. And in my case, I was a sector representative for the organic farming in Croatia, and I was the key lobbyist for the EU regulation change several years ago. And even though the whole sector was consulted, even though the Minister of Agriculture got our email with everybody in the email, they discarded our wishes and voted against our wishes. So that that is sometimes a very big problem when government doesn't understand what is the sector need. And finally, what is an open question, and what I also put on the chat. This was all done in person, so there are problems when you are doing it in person and when you are facilitating in person, but how to overcome these situations when you are online, when you are in a virtual world, where you don't have possibilities to make long breaks and to have people meet each other and talk to each other. That is still my open question, and the effectiveness of facilitation online.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elena. Lavinia, and then we'll go with Gede. Just a reminder, questions and challenges that you're wrestling with, and ones that haven't come up yet. Perhaps if you want to focus on those, but all of it is welcome. Go ahead, Lavinia.
Thank you. So I was in the same group with Simon and Gede, and just to add more on what Simon was sharing. So the initial question was like, can we have a spillover of trust? Is trust contagious somehow? So yeah, I was remembering the example that Adam had provided, either in Mexico or Canada. You were mentioning a lot the figure of leaders. So we had a leader from the campesinos, or a religious leader, or a feminist leader. So maybe dealing with these kind of leader at the beginning. So even like trying to understand the power dynamics can somehow influence the other, have some kind of influence or peer pressure to have the rest of the group following the trust, if there is trust being built. Or also, yeah, someone provided an example, or like a change in the law regulating media in the UK. There was like a mistrust from the media sector, and it was like the UK government decided to kind of use an example of something, of a similar process which happened in the US, for showing that if something similar at like being successful in a context that has some parallel with the UK one in terms of like overall culture and language, maybe it was the case also for the UK. So even like to try to build these parallels to build trust. And also, yeah, one question that I had at the beginning and that I had shared in the trust is like how to incentivize the initial, I think that's we need to have like an initial leap of faith from the like stakeholders to decide to even join the process, even if I don't trust it, but yeah, I want to join and I want to see what Adam is saying, and yeah, maybe I will just cross my arms and don't trust him, but at least I make the effort to be there, either in person or virtually.
Thank you. Yeah, lots of questions coming up around what happens in the beginning. How do you kickstart that process? We'll go with Gede and then Vanessa.
Thank you. I was with Simon and Lavinia, and I was not finished yet to, let's say, to provide case with Simon and Lavinia. But what I want to say in that occasion, that how to build a trust with the people or the smallholders, in my case, that was frequently used by other people, officials, government officials, or NGOs, CSO, frequently came to their area with promises, but finally the promise is not realized. So the smallholders with whom I talked to was finally untrust with let's say officials coming to them because too many promises without a real let's say a realization. That what I want to add from what mentioned by Simon and Lavinia.
Thank you so much. We'll go with Vanessa and then Annalisa.
Yeah, thank you. one thing that I'm just come to my mind, usually it's the general need to get like an agreement in all of these processes, and the urgency to get an agreement, quickly and fast. And I think that this will not, support, these complex systems, and to have, the right time and the timeline is usually you want to sit in a table and get an agreement in 2 days. Right now in Panama, we have protests, and the country, it's like, in a massive protest all around, and we just want to get an agreement like in 2 days. So to have, the right timeline for the process, to understand that this is something that requires times, and to get, like some of trust. So how can you get trust in like in a workshop in like a week or something like that? As we saw with the example, like on Mexico, it has been, working for years. So how do we, to provide like this common sense or general sense that the process takes times, and that, we need to comply with that, not to really have like, to have, trust, and to get like a real agreement and collaboration, not just in like, weeks or something like that, to make it more like a long-term time.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, trust in timelines is an interesting paradox, or can be. We'll go with Annalisa and then Farah.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to add to what Yelena said, because she's worked with small grants. I actually work with a small grants program. So we work directly with NGOs and local communities. So what we do is before doing multi-stakeholder meetings, is we have methodologies or community meetings, because the communities itself has power structures. And we do participatory and inclusive approaches to this, just to make sure that every community member's voice is heard and everyone has a role in the projects. We also have tools, especially for Indigenous peoples, which is self-strengthening processes. So they talk about their needs or challenges or aspirations. And we do this with communities within the country. And we also have South-South, right? Like exchanges with other countries. And this really gives them the confidence, and also they learn from other Indigenous peoples groups. So once they are comfortable, this is done in an iterative manner. Once they're comfortable, then we have the multi-stakeholder with governments or academia. And here they really speak about their self-determined priorities. So we've seen, especially in Madagascar, joint work plans with the government. But my issue here, and this is quite hard for everyone, is so Madagascar in 2005 or 2006 had the laws were basically provided land certificates to Indigenous peoples. But early this year, they have changed that. And this could actually evict Indigenous peoples without compensation. So, I mean, this is kind of hard, right? Because UNDP can only advise governments because they're sovereign states. So, I mean, despite of all the successful results, like with Indigenous peoples, with the joint work plans, they actually, the government has actually given them contracts, short-term contracts to conserve or restore government managed areas. So this is evidence that Indigenous conservation methods work. But now we have this new law in 2022.
Yeah.
Another one
I'm
is—
just gonna ask, I'm sorry, I think I just wanna, I'm conscious of time and I wanna make sure that we hear from one or two other people. But if you wanna continue and share what you're sharing in the chat, that would be great. I just wanna give a chance to the one or two other people who haven't spoken. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll go with Farah and then Vivian. And I'm just going to ask, because we only have 20 minutes and I want to hear perhaps lots of questions were asked, and we'd love to be able to have a chance to answer them and for Adam to answer them. So maybe if you want to share the things that haven't been covered, and or share them in the chat, because we'll wrap up plenary sharing in the next couple of minutes. So Farah and then Vivian. Okay, so I think we'll give them a second if they're not here. Is there anyone else who hasn't shared that would just like to add something that hasn't added yet?
Hi, this is Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi, I'm calling from Singapore. I got the time mixed up, so I missed the first like 20 minutes of it. So I'm not really sure what we're responding to. Yeah. I think the only thought that I have is perhaps that when I think about trust, it's also about generosity from the work that I do on the ground with the community gardens that is intentionally left unfenced, even though the government, the government agency that we partner with said that, oh, there will be theft, but we wanted to take it as maybe an opportunity to demonstrate that we can actually cultivate trust within community and use that as maybe a teaching and learning opportunity to build relationship and cultivate a mindset of abundance. Yeah,
thank you so much, Vivian. Thank you. Maybe just one other voice of someone who hasn't spoken yet on a challenge that you are sitting with respect to, or a question or a challenge that you're still sitting with that we can probably answer. And then feel free to continue to add questions in the chat. Just gonna give this another few seconds. Okay, so we'll continue the conversation in the chat. And Adam, based on just all of the rich stuff that was shared, do you have some initial reactions you want to share?
Yeah, so I'd like to say three things. Firstly, of course, we've all had to learn in COVID how to do this online, and it has certain benefits. Lower cost, greater accessibility for various reasons, and certain limitations. So yeah, so I just want to acknowledge that they're not the same. Okay, the most important point I want to make relates to the very first question that was asked about when does collaboration not happen or when does it break down? And I think this is the most important question to start with. And that's why I mentioned that we always have four choices, or we always have some of the following four choices: forcing, adapting, exiting, and collaborating. And why do people not collaborate, or why do they stop collaborating? Because they think that one of the other options will work better for them. So this idea that a facilitator might have that, why can't people collaborate? I want them to collaborate. I've been asked to get them to collaborate. For me, is a very unrealistic starting point. And another way to say this is, often people who have the power to get what they want without collaborating will do so. And collaboration takes place when there's enough of a balance of power such that I can't get where I want to go unilaterally. And so one of you said, I thought, put this in a good way, what can be done to change the incentives or the calculation? And when I showed you the photograph of the Mexicans demonstrating in the street, this was their way of trying to change the calculation and using their power to to change the calculation of others and to bring them to the negotiating table. So, so for me, it's crucial to start with this basic point. Otherwise, you'll get all confused and think they're maybe if I explained this better, or maybe if I said better words at the beginning, or maybe if I arranged the chairs better, people would collaborate. Usually, it's because of this basic calculation. Another question that was asked, I think in the chat, is how can facilitators build trust? Well, I'll say some things in a minute, but for me, the crucial point is that the choice to trust can only be taken by the stakeholder themselves. And in fact, I think it's not only impossible for me to get Simon to trust Julia, but would be unethical for me to tell him to do so if he has reason to believe that this would not be safe. So I think it's a terrible idea to ask people to trust others. Okay, so the other thing I want to say is, so then what can be done in this, given this reality? And I come back to the three stretches, the three aspects in which stretch collaboration is different from conventional collaboration. And each of these stretches addresses this question of trust. First, when I say recognize or embrace conflict as well as connection, this is acknowledging that there are differences in perspective and power and interests, and only when these are recognized can people decide whether they want to trust. But the worst thing to do is to say, or the illegitimate thing to do is for the facilitator to say, can we all just put our own realities and agendas at the door and focus on the common good? This is an injunction that only makes sense for the facilitator, not for the participants. The second point about experimenting a way forward addresses the reality that it is almost always impossible to agree up front because of these differences, because of this lack of trust. And so it's really only in situations of a genuine emergency that people say, okay, well, we just have to do this right now. In most cases, agreement and trust can only be built over time. And if you don't recognize, you'll have people pretending to trust, pretending to agree, but then you'll be very surprised that actually nothing happens. And finally, this, in a way, most fundamental stretch is most people, when they say for the situation to change, people must change, they almost always mean other people must change. And there's nothing more trust eroding than me telling you what to do when you don't think it's what's good for you. So the most fundamental thing, which is why I told this story about my own experience as facilitator in Canada, the most important thing to do is to ask yourself, what am I going to do differently? I once took a course with Roger Fisher. He's the author, the late author of Getting to Yes, maybe the most important book on negotiation. And I remember him telling the class, don't be trusting, be trustworthy. So I think the most basic question for the facilitator is not how can I get these other people to trust, but what can I do that will be trustworthy, and so that maybe people will take the next step. What did I say to George Moosewagen when he said, I don't trust you? I said, I'm not asking you to trust me. Can we just do this next step and see? And we did, and we continued from there.
Thanks, Adam. One thing I want to add, and you kind of said this earlier in your presentation, one of the first questions is about this, is that and you addressed it a little bit, what do you do when the group just right from the beginning doesn't want to collaborate? And the thinking that I have, and I've kind of been reflecting on a lot is that every group starts with the natural state of being in fear. So a group that's never met before doesn't know each other, especially across power dynamics or across hierarchies. The chances that they're all going to come together in the room and be like, yes, let's fully, I'm 120% in, even though there may be some factors that may have brought them there. They are at that juncture of, I'm in a little bit of fear, and the juncture they're at is, do I trust or not trust? And that's when what Adam just said around what can I do to be trustworthy as a facilitator comes in, and the role of us as facilitators come in. Other reflections, I guess it could be a reflection from the group as well, and then we can go back, see Adam, if you've got other reflections as well. Soleil, I know you had asked a question early on.
Yes, I think I think you and Adam covered this already, but basically the question around who holds the responsibility for building trust, and the role of the facilitator. And Adam just mentioned this, that, you know, sometimes as facilitators we take responsibility for building that, and in fact, you know, there's a limitation to what we can do and the extent to which we can change the reality. So the question maybe that follows is, you know, what can we do actually? What is the extent of our our field of action?
So thanks for that question. So let me, there is something more I wanted to say. And so I'll make this my closing comment. In 2017, after the signing of the peace accords in Colombia, I facilitated, or my colleagues and I facilitated, a workshop in the Norte del Cauca region, which was an area of great violence during the Civil War. And a man came to the workshop who I knew and admire, and I was surprised he came. His name is Francisco de Roo. So had just the week before been appointed head of the Truth Commission in Colombia. Very important position. I was surprised he came to the workshop. And he said he was here because he had joined because he was trying to understand, you know, how to work across difference. And at the end of the first day, he comes running up to me and says, Adam, I see what you're doing now. And I said, well, Pacho, what am I doing? He said, you are removing the obstacles to the expression of the mystery. So I didn't understand what he meant. And I spent 5 years trying to write a book about what does that sentence mean. And that's my book, Facilitating Breakthrough. But what I found so interesting about Pacho's observations is not the mystery part, which I don't understand. That's why it's called a mystery. But his emphasis, and this is my answer to your question, Soleil, but what is the facilitator doing? They're not getting anybody to do anything, ever. It's impossible, really. And it's a huge misunderstanding. 100% of the time when I give these talks, people say, how do you get people to do this? How do you get people to do that? You can't get anybody to do anything. All you can do is remove obstacles. So I find that metaphor or that hint very helpful. What can I do to remove obstacles to people, I would say, expressing their drive for power, love, and justice? So, yeah, I leave that as my final comment. And
thank you, Adam. Thank you, Soleil, as well, for the question. I think we've got just 5 minutes, and it'd be great to do a checkout and again hear from everyone. What is one thing you are taking away or will say differently or start doing from now on? So one thing that you're taking away, and it could be in the form of something you will say differently or start doing from now on. And feel free to add these in the chat and or share them out loud, especially if you haven't had a chance to share. I'm going to add the question in the chat right this moment.
Tej, and while we get participants to respond to that question, can we address Julia's question if possible, please? around tools and exercise that you can share, recommend to facilitators that help remove obstacles?
Julia, sorry, I don't normally try to advertise my own books, but this is the whole purpose of writing the book, Facilitating Breakthrough, is practically what are the actions, and more fundamentally, the places to pay attention which enable facilitators to remove obstacles and thereby facilitate breakthrough. So, there's a number of free downloads on the Reos website. So I'll offer that rather than trying to say it in a minute.
Yes, and maybe to this point, Julia and the rest of the group, maybe we can have a follow-up call internally to look at those tools and resources. I especially, this idea of sort of balancing between horizontal and vertical facilitation, and what does that mean? And yeah, we can take that on as a post follow-up session action.
I'm just seeing if there are thoughts that are coming up in the chat. That's good. Some crowdsourcing. Wonderful. Any other reflections on what you will say or do differently with respect to collaboration or trust? I see a bunch trickling down in the chat. I won't read them out loud, but please have a look. Yes, Simon, good. Well, interesting reflection. We've all been there.
And while we get participants to share, during our last minute, I just would like to say thank you to everyone that's joined. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Tej. And please make sure that you stay tuned for the rest of the events that are going to take place after the summer through our online digital community, which Federica will share the link to on the chat before we say goodbye. And I'm going to save the chat as well so that we can look into the resources and potentially also stay tuned, because I think it would be useful to get a sort of sense-making session around facilitating breakthrough, the tools that are offered in the book and in Reos Partners website. So yeah, we've got an upcoming GCC workshop Federica is sharing, so have a look at that as well. Any closing remarks, Adam and Tej?
Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And yes, thank you for sharing all your amazing ideas and tips. I really look forward to seeing you all on a follow-up call around the tools and practices that we can jointly reflect and bring together. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Adam and Tej, please, if you can stay and